The story begins with Sophie and Nolan. Nolan is a food writer for a magazine, and this time, he has been given a new topic, exploring how people in the past used to collect food. Specifically, he is tasked with writing an article on hunting and gathering. To explain the subject effectively, Nolan feels he needs first-hand experience. So, he decides to go hunting himself. The problem? Nolan knows nothing about hunting. To learn, he travels to Sophie's village with her help. Sophie's grandfather was a skilled hunter, and Sophie herself used to be very good at hunting. However, Sophie had stopped hunting 10 years ago. When asked why, she explains that during her last hunt, she locked eyes with a deer. Its innocence moved her so deeply that she couldn't bring herself to kill it. From that day on, she never hunted again, and even stopped eating meat. Now, after all these years, Sophie is returning to the world of hunting, but only to help Nolan. After all, Nolan is her fiance. Yet, her heart still struggles to agree with the idea of hunting. To support him, Sophie reaches out to her childhood friend, Kyle, for help. Kyle is an experienced hunter and agrees to teach Nolan. Kyle starts by teaching Nolan how to shoot with a bow and arrow. However, hunting with a bow requires significant practice, something Nolan doesn't have time for, as the hunt is scheduled for the next morning. To save time, Kyle switches to teaching him how to use a rifle. With the rifle, Nolan quickly improves, hitting targets with decent accuracy. During their practice sessions, Kyle and Nolan have many conversations. However, Kyle repeatedly talks about Sophie, how she's his childhood friend, how important she is to him, how well she takes care of him, and so on. This frustrates Nolan to no end. Sophie is his fiancée, and hearing someone else speak about her in such a familiar way stirs his jealousy. To make matters worse, Sophie, who hasn't seen Kyle in years, starts giving him more attention than Nolan. This infuriates Nolan further. One evening, unable to contain his anger, he storms off to his room. Sophie notices his behavior and follows him. When she finds him, Nolan lashes out. Why did Kyle have to come alone? He could have brought his girlfriend. Because of him, our trip is getting ruined. Sophie, taken aback, calmly replies, "Look, Nolan, Kyle is here because of you." Nolan realized his mistake after storming off. Sophie's words echoed in his mind, "If you don't go to him, then what's the point of this whole trip?" Guilt consumed him. Without wasting time, he went out to apologize to Sophie. However, before he could speak, Kyle appeared. Uncomfortable with the situation, Nolan left them alone. Kyle seized the opportunity to confide in Sophie. He admitted that he had recently broken up with his girlfriend and, judging by his tone and behavior, it was clear he had feelings for Sophie. Kyle's openness about his feelings made Sophie reflect on her relationship with Nolan. With Kyle's words in her mind, Sophie's frustrations with Nolan began to grow. It was as if she started doubting if Nolan truly cared about her. The hunt begins. The next morning, Kyle and Nolan set out alone to hunt in the jungle. Before they left, Sophie quietly slipped a bullet into Kyle's pocket, perhaps as a precaution. As they trekked deeper into the forest, a deer came into view. Kyle whispered to Nolan, "It's a good chance. Take the shot." Nolan hesitated, unsure of his skills. He raised the rifle, but his hands trembled. Sophie, standing at a distance, couldn't bring herself to kill the deer either. It reminded her of why she gave up hunting years ago. Seeing this hesitation, Kyle, the experienced hunter, took the shot. The deer collapsed, but wasn't dead. Nolan, horrified by the suffering of the animal, urged Kyle, "Shoot it again. Put it out of its misery." But Kyle ignored him. Instead of ending the deer's pain, he deliberately shot in a way that injured it further, leaving the animal to bleed and stagger away. Kyle chased after the deer while Nolan shouted behind him, "What are you doing? Stop! End it properly!" Kyle's behavior became erratic, almost reckless, as he pursued the wounded animal deeper into the jungle. Meanwhile, Nolan grew increasingly uncomfortable, realizing that Kyle seemed to take pleasure in prolonging the hunt. A dangerous turn. Nolan followed cautiously, sweating and on edge. He wanted to turn back, but Kyle stopped him. "If you move, you'll die," Kyle warned, his tone cold and serious. Nolan froze in fear as Kyle fiddled with his rifle, which had gotten stuck in his back pocket. Nolan, desperate to escape this nightmare, mustered the courage to free the gun. Kyle wasted no time and shot the deer again. But in the chaos, the wounded deer thrashed wildly and injured Nolan badly before collapsing for good. Suddenly, 2 more deer appeared from the bushes. Kyle shot at one, scaring the other away. The adrenaline left both men shaken, but Nolan's injuries were severe. He was bleeding heavily, and his strength was fading. Kyle, realizing the gravity of the situation, panicked. Instead of helping Nolan, he left him behind. He made his way back to the village, where Sophie was waiting anxiously. Lies and suspicions. When Sophie saw Kyle returning alone, she immediately asked, "Where's Nolan?" "What happened?" Kyle, clearly rattled, lied. "We were attacked by wolves. I tried to save him, but he was badly injured. I don't know if he's alive or dead." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She didn't trust Kyle's story, but she had no way of knowing the truth. Overwhelmed, she demanded, "Take me to the spot where you left him." Reluctantly, Kyle agreed, and they headed back into the jungle. When they arrived at the hunting site, Nolan was nowhere to be found. Sophie's suspicions grew. Flashbacks revealed that Nolan, despite his injuries, had managed to walk slowly away from the spot, trying to save himself. Sophie noticed the footprints of wolves nearby and feared the worst. She turned to Kyle, anger burning in her eyes. "You're lying to me, aren't you? You killed him because you were jealous. Admit it," she shouted. Kyle denied it, but his evasive behavior only fueled Sophie's fury. "Nolan isn't worthy of you," Kyle blurted out in frustration. "Forget him." Sophie, now certain that Kyle had betrayed Nolan, lost her temper. In a fit of rage, she punched Kyle and left him behind, determined to find Nolan on her own. The wolves' territory. Following the wolf tracks, Sophie eventually found Nolan. He was badly injured, leaning against a tree, struggling to move. Relief washed over her, but as she rushed to help him, her motorbike got stuck. She swerved to avoid hitting Nolan, losing control and injuring herself in the process. As she tried to recover, a wolf emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed on her. Sophie, armed only with a knife and a broken arm, fought the wolf bravely. The struggle left her exhausted and even more injured, but she managed to stab the wolf and escape. Another wolf appeared, and this time, Sophie used an arrow to defend herself, even with her broken arm. Barely surviving the encounter, she dragged herself to the edge of the forest, where she found Nolan trying to help himself. Summoning all her remaining strength, she picked him up and carried him to her car. Kyle's fate. As Sophie helped Nolan into the car, Kyle suddenly appeared. But something was different about him, his face was pale, and his expression was one of shock. Sophie realized why when she saw the wolves circling nearby. Kyle admitted that he had been attacked but hadn't fought back effectively because he ran out of bullets. In his panic, he had tried to use an arrow but was too slow. The wolves killed him. Sophie, heartbroken and terrified, knew she couldn't stay any longer. She loaded Nolan into the car, grabbed a fuel can, and sped off before the wolves could reach them. Tears streamed down her face as she drove. The forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, but the memories of what happened would haunt her forever. And with that, the story ends.